put together something that would kind of address the who's who in the Trump-Russia tie scandal. I'm not going to include Jeff Sessions on this because it's too recent and there's not a lot of information on exactly Jeff Sessions' direct ties to Russia other than he met with the Russian ambassador. So let's go ahead and get this done. I'm using this as kind of sort of a thanks to Sketty Ruxpin on Twitter. They have one of the more interesting flow charts that I've seen. I'm not going to go into the real detail of fled to Russia, Viktor Yanukovych, blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to hit some of the real big key players here. Rex Tillerson, Richard Burt, Carter Page, Michael Flynn, Roger Stone, Wilbur Ross, Felix Sater, Paul Manafort, and Michael Flynn. So again, there's a lot here, and I want to get to as much as I can, give you some background of what's going on. So maybe you can understand exactly how deep the ties go, because some people are saying, well, maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe it's not really Trump with ties. Maybe it's everyone around him. Maybe it's just some sort of fake news. But this has all been researched, not all of it by me, but I will give you some research on what I have found. So again, we're going to go over some of the folks in the orange and talk about them. So first up is Roger. He was an advisor and lobbyist to Trump. This guy is a real political animal. He was first introduced to Trump by Roy Cohn in the 1980s. Again, this is if I were to talk about Ray Cohn, it would take up another 5 slides, but it's interesting how that these two have known each other for a while. But he did work on Nixon's campaign, also worked in Reagan's White House. He advised Bush 42's campaign. He was a contemporary of Lee Atwater, who also worked for Reagan, and he helped Bush. So there's a direct tie between some of the White Houses there. But Lee Atwater passed in 1990, so that was kind of why he's not partner of Black, Manafort, Stone, and Kelly. I'll go into that with Paul Manafort, but there's a lot of information behind here that's really not relevant to Trump. But to give you a background on who he is, Joe Bruno, Majority Leader of the New York State Senate, ran for governor of New York against Eliot Spitzer, and Roger Stone did help, and he also helped Kristen Davis, who is the madam in the Eliot Spitzer prostitution scandal. So it tells you what kind of guy he is. He also worked on Arlen Specter's GOP candidacy in '96, Al Sharpton's 2004 candidacy, Gary Johnson 2012, Carl Palladino, Tom Keene, and Jack Kemp. So 2016. In '95, he worked for Exxon Yemen, which gives him some background in the area. He also worked as chair of Exxon Neftegas, and they had extensive holdings in Russia and the Caspian Sea. This really evolved into a friendship and a partnership with Rosneft Energy, and Rosneft is chaired by Igor Sechin. So Rosneft Energy has ties to BP Energy, Hugo Chavez, and Sechin is Putin's number 2, informally. He's not the prime minister, he's not anything else, but he's considered Putin's number 2. And this guy has a history. Yukos was swallowed by Rosneft after Sechin had Khodorkovsky arrested. So there is a lot of scandal behind this, which is completely unrelated, but it gives you, again, an idea of what kind of guys we're dealing with. So ExxonMobil entered into a drilling pact with Rosneft in 2011 for $300 billion to get Arctic drilling started. Unfortunately, it was put on hold due to the Crimea-related sanctions. So he really wanted to get this thing done, but unfortunately can't do it because of the Russian sanctions because of Crimea. And Tillerson at the time said he does not see Russian annexation of Crimea as illegal, and he feels the same with the Chinese artificial islands in the South China Seas. And he came out publicly against the Russian sanctions in 2014 after he was awarded the Order of Friendship by Vladimir Putin. So there's a definite tie between Putin and Rosneft and a lot of other stuff. So this guy's not innocent whatsoever. He is definitely part of the Putin crowd in the White House. Carter Page, guy, he advised on Gazprom, and Gazprom will come up later. But he worked for Merrill Lynch, Moscow, 2004 to 2007 as VP and COO for Energy and Power. So he advised on Gazprom. And in 2008, he left and started Global Energy Capital with a partner, Sergei Yatsenko, who's an ex-Gazprom executive. But he was hired by Rick Dearborn, Senator Sessions' chief of staff. So we have a link to Sessions and some folks who are involved in Gazprom, Rosneft, and Putin. So maybe there's something there. Anyway, Carter Page was known as some guy who really didn't know a lot of what's going on by some of the insiders in Russia. A lot of people can't remember him whatsoever. A lot of people don't know him from Merrill Lynch. A lot of people think of him as a fly on the wall. But Carter Page is definitely an operative. Not really political, more private business, but interesting nonetheless. Michael, formerly NSA chief, unfortunately a victim of a lot of things. He had a very distinguished career. 2004 to 2007, Director of Intel for the Joint Special Operations Command, Director of Intel for U.S. Central Command, Director of Intel for the IASF in Afghanistan, and Director of the DIA. So after he was let go from DIA, he moved Defense Intelligence Agency. He moved over and founded Flynn Intel Group with his son. And the Flynn Intel Group consulted for Turkey because at one point Flynn considered the president of Turkey, Erdogan, as a tyrant. And then as soon as he got hired and became a consultant for Turkey, he changed his tune. So at that point, he was pretty much bought and paid for. He was also a consultant for Russia Today, which is a TV media outlet that's controlled by the Russian government. And that's why he was a guest of Putin at a 2015 dinner. Stone's ally, very interesting guy. So he was former campaign manager. A lot of crap came out about him and Yanukovych. Well, there's a little bit more to that. So he was a 1976 Ford Committee employee. He worked on the 1980 Reagan campaign. He founded Black Manafort, Stone, and Kelly in 1980. Worked on the 88 Bush campaign, the 96 Dole campaign. And then he split off and became partner of Davis, Manafort, and Friedman, who then became an advisor to Yanukovych, who was the president of the Ukraine and a Putin puppet. This is so bad I've got to do a part 2. So Paul Manafort, former campaign manager, this is kind of a web right here. So Rick Davis was an advisor to John McCain and Manafort's partner. So in 2005, they drafted John McCain and got him to help out with some of their work. And it was so bad that McCain was requested by Bush to tone down Manafort's work in Ukraine. But that was before McCain had some influence on Montenegro's independence. And this goes to Oleg. Oleg purchased Montenegro's entire aluminum industry. He has definite ties to Putin, and he purchased an apartment in Trump Tower. Then we've got Dmitry Firtash. He has ties to Seaman, who's a mob boss. Firtash also sold gas from Gazprom to Ukraine. He used the profits to fund pro-Putin politicians, including Yanukovych. Firtash and Manafort also bought the Drake in New York City and used Trump family lawyer, family aide Arthur Cohen. So we have Manafort ties to McCain, McCain's ties to Oleg, Oleg's ties to Putin, Oleg's ties to Trump Tower, Firtash, his ties to the Russian mob, also funding pro-Putin politicians, including Yanukovych, and Firtash and Manafort have ties to Trump family aide Arthur Cohen. So this is becoming very, very tangled. And here we have Rick Davis. He's kind of a advisor, not one of the real tall ones, not the real important ones, but he's the guy who enlisted John McCain to help with Montenegro. A little background on him: he was on the Reagan staff, worked on the Bush campaign, worked on the Bob Dole campaign, and for some strange reason, he got Bob Dole's help to lobby for Oleg, who was denied a U.S. visa in 2006. So he and Paul Manafort started up Davis Manafort Consulting in 98 to 2008. Rick Davis also was a McCain campaign Senate advisor. Then McCain appointed Rick Davis in 2001 as a Reform Institute staffer. He also helped in 2008 on McCain's presidential bid. So Rick Davis is in deep with Manafort, and McCain is tied into this whole thing through Davis. Now we have Wilbur Ross, Secretary of Commerce. Okay, so Wilbur has ties to Trump. In the 80s, he was the senior managing director of Rothschild. He helped strike a deal to keep Trump as CEO of Atlantic City casinos. And Carl Icahn was involved, but Carl Icahn is not involved in the Trump administration. So we're going to walk over here, and Wilbur Ross was the CEO of Bank of Cyprus. Bank of Cyprus was used for what's known as Russian mafia and Russian laundering. So the Russians were accused of laundering money through the Bank of Cyprus. But Dmitry purchased 9.7 of the Bank of Cyprus and appointed Wilbur Ross. But Dmitry has a very interesting history himself. He founded a potash company, who then sold portions of it to a couple of folks, Suleiman and Alexander. So Dmitry sold 25% stake, and then Suleiman he took that stake and 2003 investment in Gazprom. At that time, he thought that in 2006, 2007, there was going to be a collapse of the Russian economy. So he started to investing in Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, and Credit Suisse, who then sold a good portion of that and invested in the Moscova Hotel and sold it to a third party. But Suleiman and Dmitry also have investments and interest in polymetal. And Alexander, who really doesn't have any ties to Putin at all, also has ties to polymetal. So I'm not sure how polymetal fits in with Putin or anyone else. But what's interesting is that Dmitry here bought property from Trump, Maison de l'Amitié. Senator Byrd, who's also a lobbyist. He lobbied for a new European pipeline AG company, 50% of which is owned by Gazprom. Gazprom is owned by Russian government, Putin, Medvedev, and Alexei Miller. So he's working for Putin. So there are definite ties there. But what is interesting is that the new European pipeline AG is funding the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which fuels Central and Western Europe. The Nord 1 Stream pipeline is being added on, And the whole point is to bypass Ukraine and Belarus because Ukraine isn't playing ball with Crimea. But Richard Burt also has ties to Senator Sessions, who advised on energy security in August of 2016. So again, Putin, Burt, Sessions. Trump, who knows? Steve wanted to put this in here. He was a press secretary for Michelle Bachmann, communications director for Senator Sessions, and he worked on Dave Bratt's campaign. What's really interesting is that Miller here worked for Dave Bratt, who unseated the then Republican minority leader, Eric Cantor. So Miller really isn't part of the whole Russian tie, but again, there's a tie to Senator Sessions, so I didn't want to ignore that. Felix Sater, interesting guy. So Sater, who's a convicted felon for fraud, ran the Bayrock Group, which invested in Trump Soho, which went belly up, and he also worked on Trump International Hotels in Phoenix. But he, Michael Cohen, Trump's personal lawyer, met with Andre here, who's part of the Ukrainian opposition party, and hand-delivered a proposal to lift sanctions to remove the Russian military from Ukraine in exchange for lease. Of course, that was rejected because, as Russia said, why would we lease Crimea? And last but give you some background on Black Manafort, Stone, and Kelly. They were rated as one of the worst and most despised lobbying groups because these guys are truly, truly unscrupulous. So this consulting group advised campaigns for Phil Gramm, Arlen Specter, Bush Sr., Kemp, Dole, Helms, Mathis, Hawkins, Durenberger. They also represented Trump in casino lobbying to keep casinos out of New York because, of course, they would start eating into Trump's Atlantic City hotels. So they also helped Mobutu Sese Seko. Please Google him if you've never heard for him. He's an African warlord, dictator, and all around, most likely to help the devil himself. But they also consulted for the Pakistani ISI service to push Pakistani efforts in Kashmir in a PR campaign to keep Kashmir under Pakistani control, not Indian control. They also helped Jonas Savimbi, who is an Angolan rebel and war criminal. And they were in an Angolan civil war, and the Soviets had involvement in Angola. So there's not much of a tie here. They're kind of on opposite sides, but the United States was giving Savimbi a huge amount of money, and the Angolan Civil War went on 2 years longer because the Soviets pulled out and they were still fighting. So a lot of money did pass back and forth. Another interesting part is Abdul Rahman al-Assar, Lebanese arms dealer, and they paid for campaign strategy for the 1995 French elections, and the profits were used from the French sub sale to Pakistan to fund this French election, and that was a scandal in itself. So this is the entire thing on the Russian and Trump investigation and some of the ties there. So if you want to go back to the first slide, you can see exactly what's going on. You can see that Manafort, Stone, Carter, and all these guys have ties to Russia, whether it's financial ties or some other ties, but they're all linked back to Donald Trump. It's not a conspiracy, it's actually proven, and all of this stuff is documented, but no one's really coalesced it into a slideshow so you can see exactly how these people are connected to whether it's Russian interests, Putin himself, Sessions, or other things. So it's kind of interesting. Thanks, and I hope you enjoyed it.